Hello, welcome back to another video. Today, we are going to do a deep dive on some unused and scrap content in DOWNSHOT. So without further ado, let's start with the first version. The first version of the game we'll be looking at is the current version of the game where we can find quite a few examples of leftover or unused assets in the files. First off are these unused suppressors. These came from a VR gun asset pack and they look fairly similar to the current in-game suppressors. And trying to put them on the designated guns unfortunately doesn't work, so these are just dead weights. Following up with more assets from this gun pack, we have a bipod attachment. When spawned in, it doesn't have any physics or collision, and even with making it grabbable, it still doesn't do anything. The last entry from the gun asset pack is this flashbang. This time, this model has collision, and giving it physics and grab does actually work, and you can hold it. That's where the fun factor ends though, as it unfortunately has no logic. So, pretty sad. Maybe it'll get added later. Continuing with weapon-related items, we have this cartoony-looking axe, which is actually featured in a short by CMVR from 2022, but only for a split second. In the modern version of the game, it actually does work. It inflicts damage and kills NPCs, which makes it a really cool find. Next up, we have the normal pair of glasses, which are probably the base of the toy glasses. When you put on the normal ones, they seem a lot more zoomed out and weird in the eyes compared to the toy glasses. The last spawnable here is what seems to be the base for all the tool guns. It doesn't really have any logic, but it closely resembles a spawner gun. It's missing a material and has the thicker laser though. Now for NPCs, the only spawnable one is this guy named Character Base. This one's spawned kind of weird, I guess, but this is what it should look like. This NPC has no animation and no logic besides following you. Like the gun base, it's probably the base used for NPCs. Also, it has very low health and is pretty easy to kill. Now for the first map, we have Logo Map. This map is a really interesting one in terms of what it has. Here's CMVR's profile picture. We also have the items in the game thumbnail here, including guns still in the game as items. Using my debug tools, we can find out that these are unfortunately just meshes placed on the map. There are quite a few variations of the game logo here, as well as the shop thumbnails for all the physiques. This map is actually one of my first finds of unseen content of the game, and overall is probably my favorite because it just has so many interesting things. Last but not least for this version, we have this peculiar map called Climb Map. Before, this map used to be completely blank, but recently a small map area was added to this. And if you spawn in the right spawn location, you can actually see what this strange map looks like. This map is completely untextured and looks a little strange, but the reason for this is because this map was used as a test for AI-generated maps, as confirmed by CMVR. He also stated here the original use for this map was a climbing challenge for rewards. Overall, this map is a very odd find and is definitely less interesting than Logo Map. The next version of the game we'll be looking at is 1.2, which released in June 2024. This section will be very short and simple. First up, we have the old menu featuring a lot more color than the current one. Personally, I think it should come back, it'd be cool. Next up is the respawn button that used to be in the menu before, but this most likely got replaced with the current method of free spawning, where you just simply hold the menu button for 3 seconds. It's a lot easier. Last but not least is the old spawner gun menu, which used to be blue. There also used to be another tab, which eventually got replaced with mods after modded spawnables got added. The third version of the game we'll be seeing is the original Quest release, also known as 0.13. There will be 2 main things we'll be looking at in this version, so this one will also be pretty short and simple. First thing we'll be looking at here is the old sandbox map, which is currently present in the background. This very much resembles the modern sandbox, however this one has much more stuff in it, such as these weights. Here's a very primitive version of the spawner gun that spawns zombies. And here we have some early climb tools with a slightly different material than in the modern versions. Next up, we have the old daytime hills, and not much is different from this version of the modern one, with the exception of the waves machine. Here's some gameplay in the America mode of the waves machine. Pretty cool early version of a waves game mode. The last version of the game shown in this video is the earliest you can find online, being the Alpha 0.0.1 accessible in itch.io. First thing you'll notice when starting the game is that your character is human, being the same model as the modern game agent. There's two accessible maps in this game, the Physics Laboratory and the Locomotion Center. In the Physics Laboratory, there's a guns area and a blades area. The blades area has some early versions of some swords as well as some unseen ones. The guns area is a shooting range with some early versions of some modern game guns, such as this AR Semi. There are two different and very early NPCs in the game, these shooting NPCs as well as these human NPCs, which use the same models as the players. Both of these kinds of NPCs are killable, and these human ones have very interesting physics. The last thing we'll look at is the Locomotion Center, which is a climbing challenge of sorts. Kind of reminds me of the previous map we looked at. Anyways, it's just a big climbing map, and reaching the top of the climbing section brings you to this big slide. When you eventually reach the end of the slide though, you enter a room that says, "Sorry, I was too lazy to put anything here on the wall." Very anticlimactic. Well, that's gonna be it for this video. Hope you enjoyed and learned some new stuff about DOWNSHOT and some stuff more on the development side of the game. See you next time.